Good morning and good evening. In today's video, we are going to look into a design scenario which is based on Salesforce. It's a mini scenario that's typically asked in the Certified Technical Architect exam. So let's go through that scenario. The next two slides basically depict the scenario in detail. So pause this video, read through those slides, try to attempt your design, and after spending some amount of time, please look into my solution. There could be like more than one solution that's possible. And this is one of the solutions which I came up with. So pause the video now and try to attempt the solution. Alright, so let's look into the system design, the high level architecture for the given use case. So if you look into the requirements, it's pretty much clear that we need to go with a single Salesforce org. There is no multi-org. There are no requirements around that. If you look at the objects that are needed, which are contact, account, quote, service order, and requirements around the CTI framework, it's pretty much clear that the Sales and Service Cloud Edition is the one that we need to propose in this design. Most of the requirements, if you see, will be implemented or are satisfied by the role hierarchy. So we definitely don't need the enterprise territory management that we can disregard as far as this requirement is concerned. At a very high level, as I said, we go with the Sales and Service Edition, right? And we also need to use communities. There is an SSO flow that is needed. So let's go into detail for each one of them. The core of this design is our Service Cloud and the Sales Cloud functionality. So within Service Cloud, the requirement states that the agents should be able to create the cases on behalf of the customer, and then those cases need to get assigned to specific customer service or support agents. So for this, we plan to use case assignment rules and case routing. We could use case queues or teams in order to assign those cases to the specific service support person. But we can't use case teams because case teams cannot be used with case. You can't actually do assignment to the case teams, right? So we have to go with case queues in this case. We should be using Salesforce Voice or formerly the CTI framework because that's one of the requirements. So we need a service console in place for doing it. As far as the communities are concerned, we have two communities which are directly mentioned and which you see at the top. One is the business to consumer community and the other is business to business community. So within the business to consumer community, we have around 10 million users. There are no specific requirements for any kind of a sharing rule. So we can go with the customer community, the basic minimum license needed out here. And they need access to the cases which are created by the support agent. So we have to go with the sharing sets. We need to define the sharing set. The sharing set will allow uh, the cases created by the agent to be shared with the community user. So this could be done on the basis of a direct lookup relationship. The case.contact will match the user.contact, and this is how the sharing will help us. The requirement also says that they need to have the ability to do social sign-on with Facebook. And for that, we need to create a connected app and auth providers. So authentication providers is definitely necessary for doing it. As far as the B2B community is concerned, again, there are no specific requirements for sharing. So we can actually go with the customer community, the minimum license that's needed. The functionality is pretty much the same. No specific requirement around B2B community. But what we know is that they need a very specific sign up in the sense they need to have the corporate email and their corporate ID being input to the main screen. So we should be using login flows here, and a login flow can take those and basically try to create their user records. So whenever we customize the sign up process, we have to define an Apex class, and that Apex class primary responsibility is take the input and create a contact user record, right, and associate with the correct account. So that information is captured in the corporate ID and the corporate email. Further, it says that we need to make sure the B2B community users have a two-factor authentication. And for that, we can define high availability sessions. And we could use Salesforce Authenticator app or TOTP, that is time-based one-time password, or physical key, which is YubiKey. So that functionality can be uh, provided to the specific B2B community user. Implicit in the requirements is that of channel sales team. So the channel sales team is doing indirect selling as against the B2C and B2B communities, which are kind of like direct sell ones. So we need to anticipate here that if it's an indirect sell use case, we need to have the partner community in place. But there are no other requirements stated, so we can just leave it to that and say that we need to have a partner community as well, which will interface with this application. Then we have the SSO requirements, which says that there are active directories which are specific to regions, APAC, America, and the Asia Pacific and Europe. So we should be using a uniform approach to interface with them. So ping identity, ping federate could be used in this context. That product is pretty powerful and pretty much will interface with all of these identity providers and will help us to resolve the identity of the user. So it will be kind of like pretty easy to do that using ping federate. Then we also have a requirement wherein we have to automatically provision the user or deprovision him when they join the company or they leave the company. Now, there are multiple approaches possible here. One of the approaches is that we could implement a web service and host it on the company intranet. That particular code can be hosted on the company intranet. And whenever the user joins or they leave the company, we can invoke this piece of code that will make a REST call to the Salesforce API and basically create or update the user object associated with that particular user. So we could use basic flows, basic username, password, auth flow if needed. We could also provide a form on the internet, and this form can be used to create the user, or a list view might be provided on the internet where there could be a checkbox which says that deactivate the user. So it's really based on how the intranet is implemented, how that function is implemented in the intranet. So we could do using that approach. Or the second, the better approach is that ping can itself be used to listen to changes that happen in the Active Directory, and then those can get synchronized back to Salesforce. So the second approach is probably more better in terms of having a more structured and reliable way of doing things. So that's the system design in a gist. Next is a data model. Nothing fancy about it. We don't see any kind of custom object or external object needs or requirements. It's a standard sales and service cloud data model, which is depicting the most important objects. I have left out the other extraneous objects from the picture, like quote line items and opportunity line items. We also don't see any LDV here. So if there is any kind of like large data volume object, we could have depicted it here in a specific color. The requirements don't tell us anything about the LDVs. We can anticipate that a case object might become an LDV into the future because there could be like multiple such cases created over a period of time, but that's not really uh, decipherable when we read the requirements. So the data model is pretty much straightforward, out of the box stuff, and very less customization needed. So let's look now at the actor diagram. The actors are basically the users and the main people involved in this scenario. So I have depicted it in the form of a role hierarchy, and there are various other ways of depicting it, but this seemed to be more intuitive given the requirements stated on the first page, which is all based on a role hierarchy. So at the very top, we have the CEO role, which gets split into two, one on the sales side, other on the service cloud side. So basically, we have EVP of sales and EVP of service. Then we have the SVPs of each of the regions reporting to the EVP, and then the vice presidents, the state directors, and the sales rep. which kind of like follow them down the hierarchy. We need to keep the channel rep because it's mentioned they directly report to the EVP sales. So they are at the same level as the SVP. So this is one instance where the org chart, which might be there, it might not represent the role hierarchy. So many times they are different. So it's not necessary that they will mirror each other. And the same thing we can see on the right side, which is on the service side. So we have the EVP of service, and then we have put the call center agents immediately under him. That's because of the requirement that the call center agents need full access to all the records within the system. So that's why we have kind of like created them. So we had an option to basically give view all, modify all access to this call center agents, but that's kind of like playing with fire. We are kind of like opening the security to a vast degree, and we want to basically go with the principle of minimum security policy. So we want to put them directly under the EVP of service so that whatever they do it's visible to the EVP of service. And then we have the SVP and SVP of hardware and software reporting direct to call center agents. So everything gets rolled back up to them and then to the EVP of service. So that's how we are kind of like anticipating this would work. So recall that we had proposed a partner community, and every partner community has three roles. And those roles are the partner manager, partner executive, and the partner user. And all of them basically roll to the account owner for whom that particular account is created, right? So we are not kind of like depicting that, but that's implicit in the requirements that such a thing would be needed. So that's about the actor diagram. One last thing is we have also looked into these licenses, right? So we are saying like the sales and service cloud license will be given to the CEO. Only the Sales Cloud license will be given to the EVPs and SVPs, the VPs of the Sales Cloud side. On the Service Cloud side, we definitely need Sales plus Service Cloud for call center agents, and maybe we just need Service Cloud for the others. So the idea here is to assign the most minimum license to the users, and then or to the users of the roles, and then kind of like as the project progresses further, we can expand or increase that license as the need arises. So we start with the minimum and then kind of like expand as the need arises. That should be the policy and the design principle we need to follow. So that's about the actor diagram. Finally, let's see some sharing needs for the external users. So we briefly covered for the B2C community. The requirement here is that the service agents can create cases on behalf of this B2C community user, and they need to see those cases. So for doing it, we would need to use sharing set because we are proposing community license for the B2C community user. The sharing sets would allow us to link the cases that are created by the internal users, in this case, the service support agents, with the users who are using the customer community. And that's through a direct relationship, which is user.contact is case.contact. We could also use sharing groups if the need arises to share the cases or records which the B2C community user might create with the internal users. So this gives us the flexibility to do bidirectional sharing on the customer community license. As far as the B2B community users are concerned, one of the requirements is that the channel users or channel salespeople, they can share customer records or customer cases with the B2B community user. Now, in order to implement this requirement, we are assuming few things. One thing is like we can assume the partners operate in a specific geographic area. So we could use criteria-based sharing to match the customer's zip code or the state or the city, and then basically assign it to that particular partner who operates in that geographic area. So we could do something like this. The other option is for the channel sales people to manually assign the customer cases to this community user, this partner community, not partner, but a B2B community user. Probably that is not good because there could be like hundreds of cases or thousands of cases. So we should go with the criteria-based sharing rule and make sure that automatic assignment is possible as much as we could do. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of this design. Do let me know your views and comments and share your architecture as well. I want to see like how different approaches work together. Thank you for spending time on this. Do like and subscribe, and see you in the next video.